Yes. Hey, welcome to the Leadership Toolkit. My name is Mike Phillips, and I am super stoked to be coming to you today. I have an absolutely fantastic guest. I'm excited to have her on the show. When you're tuning into the Leadership Toolkit, our goal is to be able to add value to you as leaders or managers and have a really good collaborative conversation so that you can learn from other people's successes, their failures, where they're further ahead down the path than you. And so today I am going to welcome on the show Miss Dara Koenig. Welcome to the show, Dara.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to chat with you today. Like all of the stuff that I know that you're doing and with your background in leadership and management. And I could sit and go over this for just, we could spend the whole hour just going over that. But I would love if you would share with our audience here on the Leadership Toolkit, give a little bit of background on yourself, and then let's get into it.
So, like most that we're familiar with, I've got a background in automotive. I spent the last 20 years in automotive and power sports with my specialty. Doesn't matter what type of department it is, but my specialty is building departments and teams from the ground up. I've done it with marketing, I've done it with client departments, I've done it with the hiring. So, recruiting, hiring, and training. So, in addition to that, I've also created a nonprofit back in 2019 that we do free career and life coaching to low income women. So, really, my career has been all about and still is about training and lifting up others to help them have that career and success and that future that they're looking for.
That is absolutely awesome. I was really excited, and again, so everybody knows, and you could vouch for this. We talk very little
Yes.
beforehand about the substance because oftentimes when we get into these conversations, there's so much good stuff to share. And like the changing your conversation, or as you were saying, CYC, and people can learn more about that. I have it on the screen. You can go to darakoenig.com, connect with her, and collect more information on that as well. But the career coaching piece, I think that's so powerful. So you've been doing that for 4 years. And
Mhm.
how did you get into doing that? I mean, like what was the catalyst?
The catalyst, believe it or not, was being part of that mass layoff that Auto Alert did in 2019. I was one of like 300 people that were laid off across the country. They eliminated an entire position. And after that, I found myself, I was in an okay position. I was smart with my money. And at the time, I wasn't married to Matt. And so I had set up myself to be okay for a
Sure.
while. And I had the network and everything, but a lot of the women that I worked with weren't. And so here I was coaching them and taking all of the skills that I had learned being an account manager and helping guide them. I learned very quickly how to write resumes, how to do interview coaching, things like that. And so I found that I was helping them. And I'm like, and I remembered all of the times in my career that I had wished I had had that person. And yeah, there's lots of coaches out there, but they're thousands of dollars. When you
Sure.
just lose your job, the last thing you have is a few $1,000s to spend on a career coach or even a couple hundred for a resume. And so I became that help that I wish I had had.
That's phenomenal. And I think you touch on a really good point. Like it, and I've been in that position, not fortunately, knock on wood, not for a number of years now, but you're absolutely right. When you're in a tough position, that's not like you're looking to bring more in, not put more out. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of people are definitely looking to put more out or wanting you to put more out. And it's like, well, how do you do that? So I think that's really
Especially,
amazing.
yeah, and especially when you're in like where I was a single mom. I'm like, okay, I've got to make sure I've got a roof over my daughter's head. I've got food in her belly. I've got the power on. So there's a different focus there.
Absolutely. And so then one of the things that you mentioned as we're getting into this, and this ties right into the coaching piece, when you are coaching anybody,
Mhm.
whether it's coaching women through changing your conversation, whether it's coaching individuals to be better managers, to be better team leaders, to be better people, right? I've gotten to know you well over the last few years, and so it's like if it's just that you need somebody to come in and say, hey, here's what you need to do. what do you start with? Where do you start? Because I think that's something that is difficult. So like, it's one thing if somebody has just lost their job and you say, well, you need to start with a resume and we need to start with this. But if you're going in with somebody else, maybe let's say they've been in a leadership role for a little bit and they're stuck. Where would you go in and start to coach somebody from a leadership or management perspective? Do you have, and not, I know that you don't have a cookie cutter process, but what's a process for somebody to go in and start having that conversation with leaders and managers to grow teams and move themselves?
And I start with, regardless of why or what the end goal is, I always start with the same place. Where's your confidence at? What do you think of you? Because if your confidence is shaky and you're not confident in your own skin and the direction you're going to take, everything else is built on this like quicksand. And so I always start with the person as a whole, what they think of themselves, what they think they're capable of. And I really build that up so they can believe in themselves first. Because once you can believe in yourself, then the rest is easy.
That's a really good question. And I think you're absolutely right. And it's a really good question. It's like, what do you think of yourself? What do you, man, I remember years ago, and this just spurred a thought in me. I remember having a conversation. I was in a tough spot as a manager. This was probably 10, 15 years ago. And the owner of our organization came in and he asked a very similar question to what you're saying right now. And it's one of the most powerful things. And it stuck with me. I've shared this with others. He came in and I like so many leaders and managers, we have so many things we put out, especially if you're serving others, to so many different people. And it's often, I think it's rare that people will come back to you and say, hey, are you okay? Are you, how are you feeling today? Because we're constantly going from that other direction. And I remember our owner came in and he sat me down, and there's the facade, right? You got to be strong. You got to keep going. And I remember him asking this very simple question, which is similar to what you're saying. He sat down next to me and very humbly asked me, he says, well, let me just ask you a question. Would you work for you right now? And of course, like any true strong manager and leader, my immediate response, what do you think that was? Yeah, absolutely. I'd work for me.
Right, exactly.
And he looks at me and goes, really? And just pause for a minute. And that one moment, that one piece of our conversation really forced me to be more introspective. And I was like, so I came back and I said, no, I probably wouldn't right now. I'm being a jerk. I'm not handling things properly. I'm not training my team. I'm not growing other people. I'm having a tough enough time growing myself. And so I think when you say that, you say, hey, what do you think of yourself? What do you, how do you view yourself? How's your confidence level? I think that's a really, really powerful set of questions to ask for anybody, whether it be leadership and management, somebody wanting to move into leadership or management, somebody in sales or marketing, right? No matter where they're at, the being able to answer that, and I think that's a really strong catalyst to move forward. Matt says in the side, he says, great question. Becca says, hey, it takes a big person to really answer that truthfully. Yes. And I can be the first to say I was not a big person at first. I was being more protective of where I was than so then what's your process? What's the next step? And again, when we're going through this, and then let's say you start coaching somebody through with their confidence and their leadership and their level, where they're at. When you're talking about, because I know one of your specialties is really team development.
Absolutely.
You said that at the beginning. So this may go without saying, and hopefully I'm not stealing your thunder, but part of team development is first developing the person that's at the head, right? But then what's your approach next? What do you tackle next after that?
So I'm going to answer that by telling you a story. So at Women in Automotive, who I was just talking to on Saturday, which my talk, by the way, was titled, Who Do You Think You Are? Okay, because everything has to do with about what you think about yourself. I gave this example of reframing your thoughts, and in the example and the power of it, I talked about how you can overcome a fear of a spider, because it was a silly example, but in a room full of women and a few men, there's going to be someone afraid of a spider. And
I
so
don't like spiders.
spiders are horrible. And so I go and talk about how you can overcome your fear of spiders by reframing your thought and telling yourself repeatedly, it's going to take some time, but they're small, they're tiny, and they're squishable. Okay? They're small, they're tiny, and they're squishable.
Okay.
And so this morning, fast forward, I go into the master bathroom and I'm hearing this buzzing against the window. And I look over and there's this giant thing. I don't know what it is, but I sent this video to Matt and I'm like, this thing's in our bathroom. What do we do? He's like, get the flip flop and squish it. And I had to tell myself that story. I mean, I'm literally, and I'm scared of things that sting because I'm bees and wasps and whatever, but this didn't have a stinger. So it's like, okay, I can do it. But I'm telling myself it's small, it's tiny, it's squishable as I go and squish this thing. And I go and I'm telling this because it was an opportunity for me to practice what I preach. And there's where I will look for somebody. And when I'm helping develop their leadership is, are they practicing what they're preaching? Are they willing to do the work that they're trying to get their team to do? Are they, what they're telling their team they need to grow in this area, are they willing to invest in themselves and grow in an area? Are they practicing what they're preaching, or are they just a do as I say person? And so I really make them evaluate their leadership style and what they expect of their people.
Well, and I think something there is, how can you expect something of somebody else that you don't expect of yourself?
Absolutely.
You know, we've talked about that in for years past. I've done some teaching and training as well, and that's one of the things that becomes really difficult. And I'm sure you would agree with this. Is it's like so often people will share or regurgitate things. Well, I read this in a book one time, so it must work, right? Mm-hmm. And the reality is, well, how well can you actually perform what you're asking other people to do? How well can you produce that? Not that I mean, hopefully you're going to have people that are able to perform that and produce that better than you are at some point, but you have to have at least a base knowledge. You have to be able to at least get people to that point.
Absolutely. My experience as a leader has always been, no matter what position I've ever been in, my job is to train myself out of a job. I need to bring up somebody to replace me, because otherwise I'm the only one who's ever going to be able to do it. And that's a really selfish way to build your career. We want to be indispensable and we want to be important and we want to be needed, but then we're not helping others grow. We're not developing others. And so when you train yourself out of a job, guess what? You get to move on to something bigger and better, while they get to move up to where you are.
Absolutely. Well, and if you don't train yourself out of a job, you said it here just a second ago, it's selfish. Mm-hmm. You're holding people where they're at in their journey, wherever that may be, so that you can look like the man or the woman, mm-hmm. right? So that you are the one that so by making yourself the go-to person and trying to be indispensable, in my opinion, and this is, I defer for whatever reason on this podcast, I always go back to these John Maxwell quotes, but like by trying to make yourself indispensable, you become dispensable. Mm-hmm. You're not multiplying yourself. You're keeping people where they are so that they quote unquote need you. And at some point, and I think I was talking to Ian last week and we shared this, like at some point, people are only going to follow you for so long. You mm-hmm. have to be, if you are that level 5 leader and you've got a level 7 marketer working for you, or a level 10 marketer, right? If you've got a Dara working for you and she's a rock star when it comes to team building and marketing and those sorts of things, and you're trying to hold her in that position, right? As we're talking, the reality is, how long are you going to follow that level 5, 6, 7 later?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
You're gonna go and pursue something else, and if you're continuing to grow, that's how people end up getting promoted and moving and so forth. So when we're talking about one of the things that, and to shift gears a little bit here, because I thought you brought this up and it was really valuable in our our email when we're talking, and this leads right into the conversation we're having, is training the trainer and leading the leaders and growing from within an organization, right? And which one of those do we want to tackle first? Because I think they're awesome. But we've all heard it said, like, well, you got to train the trainer, right? You have to train the person that's training to be better. But I think you added a valuable piece to that. When you're talking about leading the leaders, what direction are you going with that? How is that, and growing people within an organization? I'm just going to pass you the ball and let you go for a minute here.
I see a lot of people in leadership positions feeling quite isolated. They don't have someone to bounce off ideas from, they don't have someone to feed into them and help them grow. And let's be honest, we're all leaders, whether we're leading a department, we're leading a team, we're leading our families, we're leading our own lives. We are all leaders of some area. And there can just be this isolation. You know where I see it most commonly? In pastors and pastors' wives. Those people tend to not have very many people that they can turn to and trust. And so one of the things that I love to do is help show other people who are in leadership positions where they can turn to for help. Where can they find that sounding wall to bounce off new ideas? Where can they go and pick up the next best thing to help stuff their tool belt so they have something more to draw on? Because like I said, we hear it all the time. There's the saying, train the trainers. I mean, I think if I go in Matt's office, there's a binder that's like this thick. It's titled Train the Trainers or something like that.
Right.
But when it comes to leadership, there's a lot of those conversations just seem to be very hidden and behind closed doors, because as a leader, it's almost like you're expected to have it all figured out. And because there's that isolation, you don't really know where to go for help. So that's one of the things I love to do, is give everybody that I'm working with, either professionally or personally or coaching or training and breeding up my team, I give them all of these tools that they can go and use to go and draw off of. And I give them those so they can also help pass those along, so they have them to lead the next leader behind them.
Absolutely. So when you're saying like the resource, what are some of your preferred resources besides just, obviously I think, human capital is massive. Like if you have somebody that you can call and bounce it off with, and I do think you're right, where people become isolated and they're supposed to have it all figured out. And I know I'm repeating a bit of what you said, but like I've experienced that. I'm sure you've experienced that. I think anybody in any sort of leadership role, and one of the first times I think for myself is, when you first get and let's be clear, managers and leaders are not the same.
Two different things. Very, very different things.
What's your view before we dive into that? What's your view? What's the difference between a manager and a leader?
Well, one of the things that really helps shape my view on managers is, you've heard of Dr. Henry Cloud, right? He writes the boundary books. Well, he has a book called Boundaries for Leaders. I love this book. Amazing, amazing book. But in it, he talks about how middle management was actually born in the 80s in this big industrial boom that we had here in the US, that companies and the head leadership couldn't keep up with the day-to-day operations in their companies. And so middle management was born. A manager is meant to manage tasks, oversee the day-to-day operations. A leader sets the tone and influences the company or the people to go in a certain direction. And there is a total different skill set there.
So when you're saying, can managers be leaders and vice versa?
Yes.
Should they be?
A manager should be a leader in a way, because they have to work on the motivation and keeping teams in line. And a leader, how do I put this? Some of those higher up leaders, anybody like a senior level should always be a leader. Are they necessarily the best people to manage the day-to-day? Probably not, because a lot of times strong leaders are big picture people. They don't see the details that need to be accomplished to manage the day-to-day. So there's one of those big differences there in those personality types that I've discovered.
No, I agree with you. And I think, like when you're talking about leaders and executives, the big picture people is what's the vision? Where are we headed
Mhm.
overall? Not how do we get there, but where
Exactly.
are we headed?
Mhm.
And I think one of the things, from my experience, a lot of businesses try to mash the two of them together. They go, well, you're a manager, so you have to be a leader, and you're a leader of this department, so you're supposed to be cast a vision and managing all the day-to-day stuff. And it becomes overwhelming.
Mhm.
That you end up with like, well, everybody can be something to everyone. Just too that, or I shouldn't say advantage. One of the skill sets that leaders have most of the time, and not every time, but my experience, a lot of leaders are, uh, they're people,
Mhm.
right? They're able to build strong relationships and grow people and grow, and they view their job as, how do I grow that management team and how do I grow the people under them and so forth. Whereas like what you're saying, in the day-to-day, managers they're managing the tasks, they're managing, what are we getting done, what are the goals, what are the
Mhm.
all of the stuff and the things. Becca asked a question here. This is a good question. This is a really good question. I know Becca well. She's actually working, here locally in the Springs, and she's moving. She worked for me for a number of years, and hopefully, I was a good manager and leader to her. She asked the question. She says, "How would you transform a manager into a leader if they struggle with that aspect you're talking about?"
Mhm. The first thing is to find out why they want to be a leader. Why? And then it's from there, you transform them by shifting their perspective. Okay, because again, a manager's overseeing the day to day, making sure the little things are done, making sure everything's on task. But as a leader, and to get them into that leadership position, right, and that leadership mentality, you need to shift how they look. Can they now see why we're doing the big picture? How can they now encourage people? Can they now get people to follow them? Because a leader is pointless if nobody's following you. So it's really shifting their perspective so they can now see the big picture, so they can communicate the why. Because if you can communicate to your team and the people you're leading the why, then more times than not, you can pull them behind you. Heck, if you can get them to understand the why, more times than not, they're going to push you because they believe in it. They want it. So it's really being able to take their perspective and shift it from the day to day, making sure everything's on task and everybody's doing the right thing, to can you get them behind that vision? Can you communicate that why? Can you buy into the why? And can you influence your team to come alongside you?
And I think that goes back to what you said just a little bit ago. Is like, how do you hold others accountable for something you don't hold yourself
Mhm.
accountable for? So what you're saying here is, how do you know the why? Like,
Mhm.
how can you get in behind it? How can you communicate it if you don't know it? And so I think that's a really valuable perspective.
One
Um,
of the things I did, Mike, with my last team is I knew I was leaving the company soon. I knew I was definitely leaving that department soon, and I was handing the reins over to somebody else while I continued to build the recruiting, hiring, and training department. And so I shifted our daily conversations from "what do you need from me" to, and this is a off the wall question, and it really startled them at first. To I asked them this question of, where did you get your blueberries? And they're like,
where
what are
did you
you
get?
talking? Where did you get your blueberries? And I
Okay.
heard this trick listening to a podcast. I believe it's the Human Innovations and Capital podcast.
Okay.
And this guy was talking about how when he started asking his team where'd they get their blueberries, it really shifted. And it's the why behind it, is because we used to be hunters and gatherers, right? And so a
Uh-huh.
win for the day was you would come back to your camp with a pile of blueberries.
Okay.
And you were expected to share with them how you found them. Where did you get your blueberries? Where did you have a success? And where did you have a win that day? And so when I changed the conversation, was the theme here.
Changing the
When I changed
conversation.
the conversation with my team to what do you need from me to be successful, to where was your success? And they began sharing that with each other. Not
Wow.
only did they start celebrating those successes, but they started being able to stand on their own. They made better decisions for themselves. They handled situations easier because they were now looking for that win, that growth, that success story that they could share with the others and help them learn from it.
That's really powerful. That is a really powerful question. Where'd you end? You want to talk about totally not in business? I didn't know where you were going to go with it, but I think it becomes. I think one of the things that becomes really powerful is then that creates that team collaboration,
Mhm.
that synergy, right?
Mhm.
Because and here's the thing: what if someone comes back with no blueberries?
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if someone just tuned into the podcast right now, they're like, "What the hell are they talking about?" Right? But if they didn't come back with any blueberries for the day, if they didn't come back with any wins, any successes, anything to celebrate, the high fives and the hugs and the stuff that happens that makes us all feel like we accomplished something, I have to imagine that you saw a shift in the team then also because you had other people saying, well, here, let me help you. Let me show you where to get the wins. Let me grow you in this
Exactly.
area.
Exactly. They started needing me less, and they depended on each other and then pulled each other in the direction the team needed to go.
That leads to sort of a next piece of the conversation because you were talking about, and this is a perfect question as Becca was asking, and she said, yeah, she's a staffing specialist with an employment agency here locally, and so one of the cool things about her, about knowing Becca, is uh, she probably much like you gets to feel that win when she sees somebody else
Mhm.
enter into the workplace and um, like there's so much power and so much energy and just lack of a better word, like the jazz, right? When you see somebody else see that success. um so as you're talking about too, that's one of the things that leads right into one of the next points we had mentioned, was like growing the leadership from within the organization.
Mhm.
So that, I think that's such a powerful statement. It's just, where did you get your blueberries? Like, that's the start of growing that leadership, because it doesn't matter if you have a team of 3 or 5, 7, 10 people, right? If you have people that are all growing alongside one another. Um, Actually, let me ask you this question. This is going
Okay.
to be off the wall. When you're the team development person, if you are a leader or manager, actually probably more. This is probably more of a management question. How many people do you think you can effectively lead directly?
Mm.
I know I'm catching you flat-footed.
You
I'm just
are. I
curious.
know. For me, the largest team I've ever led one-on-one has been 6.
Okay.
Um, but I believe fully in keeping your circle small and having that trickle down effect.
Okay.
And so I would recommend it be no more than that half dozen, 5, 6, around there. But then each one of them should have 5 or 6 under them. And
Right.
if they're leading and if they're managing, you could probably do a larger team if all you're trying to do is make sure everybody's meeting their daily objectives. But to truly lead somebody and invoke change within them, you need to have time to spend with them on a daily basis. And that's really hard to do if you're juggling a team of, say, 20.
Right. I agree. I mean, because then you're seeing, if you're really spending time with someone, let's say, because how effective can you be when you're saying you've got to spend one-on-one time with somebody? And I get excited about this sort of team leadership and the one-on-one aspect of watching somebody grow and
Mhm.
helping to nurture that person and know what excites them and what fires them up. So like you said, if let's say you have a team of 20, how many effective conversations can you be having each day? A couple, two, three.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, you're only going to be touching one of these people in a leadership manner once every 10 days.
Mhm.
And I mean, is that enough?
For them, I would say no. But again, it also depends on the person. But I would say no. Effectively, no. You're not going to be an effective leader. You're going to be someone that they check in with to say, yeah, I'm going in the right direction.
Sure. Yeah, and I would agree with you. I would think 5, 6, 7. Matt shares a perspective over here, and he go figure, he'll push back on the both of us, right? He says, I think the 12 is the max. And you can imagine why he picked 12 being the
Mhm.
max. He says, 12, I think 12 is the max because that was the number Jesus limited it to. If he thought 12 was the max, I'll go with that, but smaller is way better too. And I do think I think that's a really good perspective to share, is because it beyond that point, I really think beyond 10 people, it becomes really difficult to have daily one-on-ones and still be effective at the things that you're supposed to be doing to grow yourself, grow the
Yeah.
company, grow those things. And he said that as well, like bingo, daily one-on-ones. So one of the things, and we touched on this earlier, and then Becca asked the question here, when we're talking about growing leadership within an organization, how do you choose who's the right person? How do you know where do you start on that? And I know we've had sort of an overarching conversation on this, but when we're talking about growing leadership with an organization, um, I have found from my experience, and with you having been in automotive, I think a lot of automotive people that may tune into the show would agree. Like, oftentimes we get somebody that's really good at stuff, and we keep them in that role, and then we always end up we fall in the trap so often of looking to the outside. Well, I need this experienced leader to come in and save us all, right? I need
Mm.
this experienced manager. Yeah, I see your reaction. I need this experienced manager. I need this person to come in. They're going to save us all, and they're going to do the next best thing. And then all of a sudden, you brought in this person that looked great on paper, but when you move them off of paper into the real world for 30 or 60 days, maybe they don't show the philosophies of the company.
Mhm.
Maybe they don't share the integrity of the company. We've seen that, right?
Mhm.
Maybe they don't share the processes of the company that they're in. So when you're talking about growing, like really truly growing leadership, and I think you touched on this with Becca's question. So I'm like, where else do you go with that? Who do you choose? Who do you pick? Do you always pick the top performer?
No, not at all. Sometimes a top performer is perfect right where they are. Um, but you are right about one thing. Very few things demoralize a team like bringing in an outside leader to come in and take over. Because I
Right.
guarantee you, within every single department, every single group of people, every single team, there is somebody that is just screaming and inside, wanting that opportunity, wanting someone to take the chance and let them out of this box. Um, and no, it's not always the top performer. More times than not, is probably not even the loudest person in the room. Okay. I very much believe that confidence is quiet.
Mm.
Insecurities tend to make someone loud. So when I'm evaluating who's to bring up my next person and who's going to follow me, I will look at, are they willing to do the right thing all the time? Craig Groeschel puts it in his leadership habit books. Are they willing to do the hard right?
The
And
hard
that's,
right.
you're
Yep.
willing to do the right thing even when it's the hard thing. So I look for that in a leader. Are they willing to be humble and grow? Can they take correction? Because a good leader can be corrected. If they're above correction and they always think they have it figured out, they're not the right person to lead, because
Can
they're
I
going to
jump in
lead
here?
in the way that they want to, and they're always going to think that they're perfect.
I have seen that happen so many times when you move somebody into a leadership, and that for me, that's like the biggest red flag that you're touching on. You
Mhm.
move somebody in there, and immediately, if they get butthurt when there's any criticism around, they're dead wrong. Right.
Absolutely.
If they like, and I understand there's a certain amount of ego that goes along with it. There's a certain amount of like, I think people by nature do want to feel like that they're right, you know, but if a leader can take a step back and really take whatever it is, coaching, criticism, whatever you want to put that title on it, I think, man, you are so right with that, that it's, if they can't take that coaching, if they can't take the learning, if they, and for lack of a better word, that I love the term, like if they get butt hurt over something, if they need boo boo cream, then they're just not the right right fit. And I'm sorry to interrupt you. You keep going.
Oh, you're fine. One of the things in at PSX that we were developing with our leadership is having that authority means you gave up the right not to listen. And it was a really hard thing to grasp your head around. But to put it this way, so if I'm saying I have the authority and my statement is the end all be all, and what I say goes and happens in my department, my team has the right and has the obligation. If they have questions, they need to know more, they have to come to me. They have that privilege to come to me. As their leader, I've given up the right not to listen to them. I don't have to do what they want me to do. I don't have to make changes, but I have to be willing to listen to the input from my team. That is part of being the leader.
I think that's really strong. And I think you said it there at the beginning, is it's like, well, if what I have to say goes, if I'm the end all be all, and I think there's a lot of leaders that think that way. There's a lot of managers that think that way. They go, well, I got this manager title. They put me here for a reason, so this is how we're going to do it. And I think it's important that we acknowledge, like, as any leader, I mean, for goodness sake, I've been in some leadership role, form or fashion, coaching, youth sports on up to this for in excess of 20 years. I know you've been 15, 20 years or more in like direct leadership roles. And I learned early on, like, just because you say something is your way or the highway, especially if you don't have the respect of the team yet, like, hey, I got the title, I defer back often to like my years as a youth hockey coach, right? Because I was the coach, therefore I was in charge. Yeah, try that with 10 to 12-year-old kids. You quickly realize you're dead wrong.
Yeah,
they don't care, right? They don't be necessarily disrespectful, but the reality is, and I think this is a hard concept for people to grasp also, is when it comes to the title part of leadership, you may have a leadership title, you may have a management title, but the reality is there's somebody else almost all of the time on your team that's the actual leader. There's somebody else that has that actual respect. And I think that's something that's powerful too, is you got to be able to, you really need to find out how to connect with that person and often work through them while you're gaining the respect of the team, while you're growing, while you are moving in and implementing the things that are necessary, that need to be implemented, that need to happen for the team to win. Like in the case of youth sports, like there's a definite win or loss. You either won the game or you didn't. And I'm still that old school guy. But I think that was something that I learned early on, is there's always somebody else that already has the respect of the team. And you touched on that just a minute ago. Like there's somebody on the team that's pining for that. They're saying, hey, I want the shot. And the reality is, if you've got another 5, 6, 7, 8, 20 people around them, those people know they want the shot too.
Exactly. And it very few things instill confidence in a leader as seeing you turn over control to somebody else. If you're willing, very few things will instill confidence in you as a leader as watching your team see you turn over control to somebody else.
I agree.
Because
Absolutely.
they know that you're not this power hungry person. You want to see other people succeed. So you're looking like, I'm gonna let you take lead on this. I'm gonna let you grow from this. I'm gonna let you learn from this. I had one of my employees, I was grooming her and training her up to take over my position. And she always wanted to be the solutions person. She would always come in. As soon as she'd hear a problem, she would come right in with a solution. And I was like, we need to work on a skill. She was like, what's that? I was like, you need to ask better questions. So for 3 days, Mike, 3 days. Oh, and one of those days was Friday, Saturday, Sunday. She got to stop this on Monday when she came back to work. She was allowed to answer everything with a question, both in personally and at home. And I did that to her to help grow her and teach her how to ask better questions. And then when she came back on Monday, she got to lead the meetings for the week. She got to lead how to ask the team these questions to pull out of them where they needed to go. She got to lead the calls with our dealers that we were on together.
That's awesome. Questions are a powerful, powerful thing. I think that if we have, I don't even want to say the humility, if we have the confidence, the know-how, like if we're willing to not be the solutionist all the time, if we're willing to ask questions, there's so much power in that it affords us the opportunity to learn. And I bet
Mhm.
you one of the things she would probably tell you, and I'm guessing at this, but you could correct me if I'm wrong, is that she realized that her solution was not always the best one.
Mhm. Yeah, she learned that when she dug in just a little bit deeper, that there was more going on than what was seeming to be going on at the surface.
Right. Yeah. Hey, here's the surface answer. Here's the surface answer. Here's the surface answer. And I think you said it earlier. Like a lot of times, the people that are the loudest, the ones that come in with the first solution, are sometimes the ones that are insecure. They want to get it out there because they know how to execute that thing. Well, I know what
Mhm.
this solution is, and I can do it. Right. I can accomplish this. So if we do it this way, I can look good.
Yep.
But if I actually ask the question and listen to what somebody else, a different tact, it may move the company forward further, may move the team forward further, it may move them forward further, but they may not have that confidence level. That's that insecurity creeping in. They may not have the confidence level to execute on what it is that the other solution that somebody is offering.
Exactly.
Ben's got a comment here on the side. He says the challenge, because we were talking about when leaders, you often have a real, like if you've been appointed in there or you've been put in a manager role, not appointed, um, but I don't always think through what I say. If you've been put in a manager role, we were talking a minute ago about, oftentimes you have a person that's the real leader on the team,
Mhm.
right? And Ben says the challenge is when the actual leader, the person people are looking to that has their respect, is unfortunately steering things in a wrong direction. Then you have a big job to do. He says, because you have to lean into that person and build
Mhm.
rapport and relationship with them to shift their thinking. And by doing so, shift the team.
Absolutely. And there goes recognizing who that leader is first and then getting them behind the why. Going back to Becca's question, how do you transform a manager into a leader? You shift them and their perspective and being able to communicate the why that we're going this direction so you can pull your team on behind. And so if you have a person that's leading from the sidelines and leading behind the scenes and leading in a wrong direction, then your job as the leader, the true leader of the team, is to get that person bought into the why. And remember, sometimes there's more times than not, there's a million different ways to get to the same end result. Okay. You can go, there's straight paths, there's curvy paths, there's lots of different ways. But as long as we're all bought into the same why and the same end goal, how they get there, I don't care. I really don't care as a leader if someone can do their job effectively and like top game and they're only working 3 hours a day compared to someone who's going to be clocked in for 8 hours. I don't care how you get to the end result. I just care that we're there, that we've achieved this goal, and that we've all gone the same direction as a team. And so it's getting someone behind that why that's going to get them in that right direction. And if they're influencing the team, when you get them bought into that why and you get them behind you and alongside you, they're going to bring the others up as well.
So how do you help get them bought into the why? Ben brings up one good point. Okay, so establishing rapport with them, but
Mm-hmm.
we used to go through exercises in our own business that you kind of had three levels of people. You had advocates. Advocates are up here. They're always for the business. They're for like whatever it is, they're going to get behind it. Then you have apathetics. Those are the show me people, right? They're like, well, I'll wait and see. Is this idea going to work? And then you have saboteurs. You have people that flat out say, my way's better, right? And I don't care what you say. I'm going to do that. So how do you move somebody? Like in Ben's example, and this is, I may be taking it to the extreme, Ben, but he's saying, okay, well, if somebody's not headed the right direction, so if they're that saboteur, if they're not headed the right way, or they're a perceived saboteur because you're headed off in this different direction, how do you maybe move them up a level to an apathetic? How do you move them then into um, and I understand where you're saying, hey, they've got to get bought into the why.
Well,
But how do you move them?
sometimes, Mike, we need to prune a team. Sometimes if there's an unhealthy branch, it needs to be pruned.
I like that
Okay, and
answer.
that's That is the first and foremost the decision a leader will need to look at. Is this person, are they a saboteur? Are they someone that is just not getting the vision? Is that someone that doesn't believe in the vision? Is this someone, and there's some heart-to-heart conversations and hard conversation that needs to be happening. And as a leader, we cannot back away from the hard conversations. That is our responsibility. And if we can't get this person bought in, and their way is the right way, no matter what anybody else wants to do, it's never going to change, then sometimes we need to prune that team
And
keep
that's
the
one of the
healthy
hard,
branches.
that's one of the hard conversations. Nobody wants to talk about that, right? So often we want to talk about, and and again, not to just hang on to one comment, but Ben says, hey, you got to establish rapport and establish a relationship with that person. But the reality is, for anybody, and I think you're spot on, Dara, just spot on with, like, sometimes you got to prune the branch, because as much as we want to have a relationship and we want to build rapport and we want to be friends with everybody, not everyone is going to like you. Not everyone is going to buy into the vision. Not everyone's going to see the why. Not everybody can see from the mountaintop. Some people just, they want to stay. Like, if you're climbing up the mountain and you're going here, and like you said, okay, at some point I want to get over here to the top of the mountain. We're starting down here. I don't know, down here. I got to get on the screen, right? And we're moving across to the top of the mountain. Like, it doesn't matter if the thing looks all like this, as long as we end up over here. But so often people want to sit down there and people start moving, and those saboteurs stay at the bottom, and all they're doing is staring at a bunch of butts, and that's their perspective, and they don't want to move anywhere else. And I think you're right. You're absolutely right on. Sometimes you got to say, okay, well, hey, what sort of recommendation can I offer for you in your next career? Right? You're a great person. You might be great in a position. You're just not going to be great for this team.
Absolutely. And every team has to have their workers. Okay. Those ones that are just going to put their head down, work whatever needs to be done, and just get the job done. But if they're being toxic to the team and pulling them in a wrong direction, then I don't care how effective they are at the job. They're killing the team. They're killing the company, and they need to go.
Well, there's something to be said. Like, yes, you need people to accomplish the tasks. Yes, you need people to pursue the goals, but there is so much to be said for the power of mindset and energy. And the reality is, mindset we have control over, but energy in an environment, and not to get all frou-frou and weird here, but energy in an environment, it doesn't choose to be positive or negative. It just accepts where you're at and amplifies, right? So if somebody's negative and you don't cut that right out, you're going to end up with another person negative and another person negative and another person negative. It's just like what you're talking about, pruning the branches. If you prune the branch, you move on, it allows everything else around it to flourish. But if you don't, it starts infecting the rest of the tree or the bush or
my talk Saturday at Women in Automotive, I started with an exercise designed to make everybody in that room physically uncomfortable. And I did it for the one, right? And I did it with purpose. I did it because I wanted to remind them that growth is uncomfortable. If they're comfortable, then great job. By all means, be happy with your life and be satisfied with where you are. But if you want to grow, you have to be willing to be uncomfortable.
Can you share the exercise?
I made them get up and physically switch sides of the rooms, switch tables, switch sides, move out of where they came. Because, when you walk into a conference, you find that seat that you think you might be invisible or you can be surrounded by your friends. I made them move.
Absolutely. And I think that's awesome.
I gave them the invitation to, if they're comfortable and they don't want to grow, I give them the invitation to leave. I was like, this isn't for you because I'm going to push you. Thankfully, nobody took me up on the offer. They all decided to stay. But that's true. And that's how it is with your team. If you have someone who is just, they don't want to grow, they don't want to move, they're okay with where they are, and they're telling everybody else to just be okay. No.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. Like the physical movement of people. Like when you're talking about, because you just spoke last week, right?
Just
It was
Saturday,
just
yes.
last week. Yeah. So when you were speaking there and you're saying, hey, I kind of presumed a little bit like you physically, and for anybody that doesn't know, if you haven't been to a recent, conference of any kind, I always recommend go to at least one conference a year for business growth that's going to grow you in business, and go to at least one conference a year that's going to grow you for personal growth.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You've got to invest in yourself, and you got to invest in your business. And one of the ways is you got to get out of your daily norms,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, what you're doing, and we're always looking from the inside out. Sometimes you got to go out and find other people so you can look from the outside in at what it is that you're doing. And so I think something like that you're sharing is awesome, because it does pull people out. When you go to a conference, they find, like you said, the place that they're invisible, or they find the people they know.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like, let me have you be a safety blanket because I know you and maybe I won't get picked on and I don't know what to expect.
Exactly.
And something that I've heard said, and I've said many, many times, is motion creates emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when you get up and physically move somebody, and you like on something like that, Dara, I think that is phenomenal. And that's probably why nobody took you up on the opportunity to leave. They're like, okay, all right, sign me up. Let's see where we're headed.
Right, exactly.
So, well, hey, this has been a really phenomenal conversation. I would love to have you back on the show again sometime in the future. So in the meantime, tell people, just one more quick reminder for anybody here. First off, do you have any final sort of thoughts as we're coming down to the end here?
Just one, thank you. Thank you for having me on and allowing me to speak. And thank you guys for asking questions. Oh, I love it because it makes me stop and think. So
Yes.
Absolutely. And then too, just don't be afraid to grow and invest in yourself. The one thing you can always invest in is yourself. So
absolutely. And thank you likewise for coming on the show. I've been stoked for, since you signed up. I've been really excited to have this conversation with you. Again, I've got it on the screen here for anybody that has questions for Dara, wants to connect, darakoenig.com. And also she, as she mentioned at the beginning here, she runs Changing Your Conversation for women to grow themselves and to be able to connect them as well. So thank you. And with that, I got to find the right buttons here, and I'll go ahead and take us out. For everybody that tuned into the Leadership Toolkit today, thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us. I hope that you really got some value out of this conversation. Like, Dara is such a phenomenal individual. I encourage you, make sure to go and connect with her. You can connect at The Real Dara Koenig on Instagram as well, and her website. And she's a phenomenal person. She's a phenomenal leader and somebody that's great. So I thank you, everybody. Make sure, do me a favor, like the show, share the show out. If you gain some value from this, share it with your friends. I'll be dropping some additional little nuggets here from the show in the coming week, and make sure to share that so that we can add some value and impact other people in that leadership arena. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and joining me today on the Leadership Toolkit. We'll see you back here next week. Until then, be great.